He hadn't planned to stop here tonight. But the flight was late, his son was exhausted, and this hotel was close. His hotel.
We have a reservation.
The one he built from nothing over 11 years. The flagship property of Carter Hospitality.
Sir, I cannot help you without a
The place
reservation.
that was supposed to represent everything he believed about how people deserve to be treated when they walk through a door. He walked in wearing a gray hoodie and old sneakers, his son asleep on his shoulder. And within 4 minutes, the front desk clerk had decided he didn't belong. Within 10, the manager had called security. Within 20, 2 guards were moving toward him in his own lobby. He still hadn't said a word. Not one. Then his son woke up, looked at the guards, looked at his father's face, and asked the question that silenced the entire room. "Dad, are they making us leave because of how we look?" That was the moment he reached for his phone. Stay with us. Damon Carter had not intended to make this stop
I need you to
tonight.
get here right now.
2 months abroad had a way of stripping everything down to what actually mattered. And what mattered tonight was simple: a shower, a real bed, and his son Eli's breathing beside him in the dark, steady and close, the way it hadn't been for 8 weeks. The flight from London had landed 2 hours behind schedule. By the time they cleared baggage claim, collected Eli from his grandmother at the arrivals gate, and got to the car, it was nearly midnight. Eli had fallen asleep somewhere between the car door closing and the first traffic light. He was 9 years old, and he had been awake since 5 in the morning on pure excitement. And now he was completely, utterly gone, his head against his father's arm, one hand still holding the worn stuffed bear he had named Captain when he was 4, and had never once considered retiring. Driving 40 minutes home in that condition felt reckless. So Damon made the decision the way he made most decisions, quickly, cleanly, without announcing it to anyone. He knew exactly where they were going. The Grand on 5th Avenue, the flagship property of Carter Hospitality Group, the hotel that had taken him 11 years to build from a single struggling property in Charlotte into what it was today. He had opened this location himself, cut the ribbon himself, stood on that marble floor and told his team that this place would represent everything he had ever believed about how human beings deserved to be treated. He had not been back in 6 months. He had not called ahead.
Damon had a habit of visiting his properties this way, unannounced, dressed the way he was dressed now, gray hoodie, dark jeans, plain sneakers, no watch, no luggage that announced anything about who he was or what he had. It was the only honest way to see what was actually happening inside his buildings when no one was performing for the owner. His father had spent 30 years as a hotel porter, 30 years of carrying other people's bags, pressing other people's uniforms, holding other people's doors. And something he had said once, just once, on the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening when Damon was 12 years old had never left him. The way a place treats the people it thinks don't matter, his father had said, that tells you everything. Not the people it's trying to impress, the people it thinks it can afford to ignore. Damon had built an entire company around that sentence. He shifted Eli against his shoulder and pushed through the revolving door with his free hand. The lobby of the Grand was exactly as he remembered it, warm light falling across Italian marble, the faint sound of jazz coming from somewhere near the bar. A long front desk of dark mahogany staffed at this hour by a single clerk.
The space was designed to make people feel immediately welcome, immediately at ease. Damon had signed off on every detail of that design himself. He crossed the floor slowly, mindful of Eli's weight, and approached the desk. The clerk was a woman in her early 30s, well-groomed, navy uniform. Her name tag read Vanessa. She looked up when Damon approached, and something moved through her expression. Not dramatically, not with any visible hostility, just a quiet recalibration. The kind a person's face makes when their eyes deliver information their brain has already decided what to do with. She looked at the hoodie. She looked at the sleeping child. She looked back at her screen. "Good evening, sir. I need a room for one night. 2 guests. Doesn't need to be anything special." Vanessa kept her eyes on the screen for a moment longer than the question required. Then she looked up. "I'm sorry, sir." Her voice was pleasant, practiced. "We're fully booked this evening. No availability." She smiled with the smooth patience of someone who had delivered this particular line many times. Damon did not respond.
He took a small step back from the desk and stood quietly. Eli stirred slightly against his shoulder, murmured something that wasn't a word, and went still again. And then the front door opened behind him. A man walked in, mid-40s, blue blazer, rolling suitcase. The particular ease of someone who had never once in his life walked into a room and wondered whether he would be asked to leave it. Vanessa's posture changed immediately. Her shoulders lifted. Her smile arrived fast and completely genuine. "Welcome to the Grand. Do you have a reservation with us this evening?" The man did not. He said so pleasantly, without any apparent concern, the way people say things when they already know the answer will work out in their favor. It did. Within 3 minutes, Vanessa had located a room, processed a card, and slid 2 key cards across the counter with a warmth that filled the space between them. Damon watched every second of it. He did not move, did not speak, did not change his expression. He simply watched and catalogued and understood with complete clarity what he was seeing. Because sometimes a man lets the room reveal itself entirely before he decides what to do about it. Sometimes the most important thing is not to interrupt the truth while it is still presenting itself. He stepped back to the desk. Vanessa looked up. Something flickered across her face, a brief, barely visible tightening. "Sir, as I mentioned, we don't have—" "I'd like to speak with your manager on duty, please." His voice was level, unhurried. 4 words that carried no heat and required no response except the one he had asked for. Vanessa held his gaze for 1 beat too long. Then she picked up the desk phone and made a short call. Damon waited. He looked around the lobby, at the guests settled into lounge chairs near the bar, at the concierge desk where a young man named Joel, according to his name tag, was watching the situation with the careful stillness of someone who is paying close attention and choosing, for his own reasons, not to show it. At the light falling across the marble, at the jazz still drifting from somewhere near the bar, soft and completely indifferent to what was happening at the front desk. He had built this place to feel like a sanctuary. He was learning something tonight about the distance between what you build and what it becomes once you hand it to other people to run. The manager arrived within 2 minutes. His name tag read Craig. He was in his early 40s, the kind of man who wore a pressed suit at midnight because authority, in his understanding, was something you maintained through appearances. He had clearly been briefed before he reached the desk because he did not arrive at the situation with an open mind. He arrived with a conclusion already drawn. "Sir," Craig positioned himself beside Vanessa.
two of them on one side of the counter, Damon on the other, Eli still asleep on his shoulder. "I understand there's been some confusion. My colleague has already explained that we have no availability tonight. I'm afraid there's nothing further we can do for you." Damon looked at him. Just looked at him. Quiet, completely still. Craig continued, filling the silence with the particular confidence of a man who has misread surrender as surrender. "I'd encourage you to try the Marriott on 6th. They tend to have availability at this hour." Damon said nothing. Craig's jaw shifted slightly. "Is there something else I can help you with?" Still nothing. The silence had a quality to it now, not empty, full. The kind of silence that makes people in a room unconsciously lower their voices and look toward the source of it, without fully understanding why. A woman at the bar had turned on her stool. The couple near the elevator had stopped their conversation. Joel at the concierge desk had gone completely still, his hands flat on the surface in front of him. Craig straightened his jacket. "Sir, I'm going to need you to either make alternative arrangements or I will have to ask you to vacate the lobby." Damon looked at him with the expression of a man who is seeing something clearly and has decided to let it continue a little longer, because he needed to see the full shape of it, not for his own satisfaction, but because if this was happening here, in the property that set the standard for everything else in his portfolio, then he needed to understand exactly how deep it went before he did anything about it. Craig gave a short nod toward the far end of the lobby. Two security guards began moving toward them, and that was when Eli woke up. He came back to consciousness the way children do, not gradually, all at once, blinking into the warm light of the lobby, taking in the marble and the jazz and the two large men walking toward his father, with the complete unguarded alertness of a child who has not yet learned to pretend he doesn't see what he sees. He sat up straighter, clutched Captain tighter, looked at the guards, looked at Craig, looked at his father's face, at the stillness there, at the thing his father was holding with both hands that Eli could feel without being able to name. And then he looked back at Craig and asked with the total sincerity of a 9-year-old who takes questions seriously, "Dad." Pause. His voice was quiet, clear. It carried the way children's voices carry in still rooms. "Are they making us leave because of how we look?" The question had no accusation in it. That was the thing that made it land the way it did. It was not a protest. It was not a performance. It was a 9-year-old boy trying to understand why the math of what he was seeing did not add up, why the men were walking toward his father, why the man in the suit was looking at them the way he was looking at them, why the room had gone so quiet. It was just a question. But sincere questions asked clearly in still rooms have a way of traveling further than anything rehearsed, and this one traveled. The woman at the bar had gone completely quiet. The couple near the elevator had both turned now, no longer pretending to look elsewhere. Joel at the concierge desk had not moved, his eyes still fixed on a point somewhere on the surface in front of him, his hands still flat against the counter. Even one of the security guards, the one on Damon's left, had slowed his approach in a way that was small but visible. A half-step hesitation that said something in him had registered where he was standing and was not entirely comfortable with it. Craig did not answer Eli. He looked at Damon instead, which was, in its own way, an answer. Eli followed his father's eyes, then looked back at Craig, working through it with the patient, methodical focus of a child who does not let things go until they make sense. Then he turned back to his father, and his voice dropped, just for him, just between them. "Dad, you're not going to say anything?" Damon looked down at his son, at the tired face, at the worn bear tucked under his arm, at the eyes that were watching him with complete trust, waiting to understand what a man does when the world behaves this way. He had built an entire company because of his father, because of 30 years of night shifts and worn uniform elbows, and that kitchen table on a Tuesday evening when a man who had every reason to be bitter chose instead to give his son clarity. He had built hotels that were supposed to be the opposite of every place that had ever looked at a man like his father and decided before he opened his mouth that he did not belong. And now he was standing in his own lobby, his son beside him, a manager who had arrived with his conclusion already drawn, 2 guards still moving toward them, a room full of people who had recognized that something wrong was happening, and each had decided for their own reasons that it was not their place to say so. He had seen enough. He had let the room reveal itself completely. He had watched every person in it show him exactly who they were when they believed there were no consequences for it. And now he knew the full shape of what he was dealing with, not just tonight, but in this building, in the standard he had set and the gap between that standard and what had been allowed to grow in his absence. Lower voice. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie, found the contact he was looking for, pressed call, and brought the phone to his ear. The call lasted 40 seconds.
He said 4 sentences, listened for 10, ended the call. Then he put the phone back in his pocket, found the nearest chair, settled Eli against his side, and waited. Craig took a step forward. "Sir, I have been more than patient with you this evening, and I am telling you for the last—" Damon looked at him. Just looked at him. And something in Craig's sentence ran out of whatever was powering it and stopped. The 2 guards had halted a few feet away. The lobby held its breath. 90 seconds passed. Then the elevator chimed. It was a small sound, the kind the lobby produced dozens of times every night without anyone registering it. But every person in that room registered this one. Every head turned toward the elevator doors as they opened. Sandra O'Coffer stepped out first. She was the COO of Carter Hospitality Group. She was wearing a jacket she had clearly pulled on in a hurry, over clothes that said she had not expected to be downstairs tonight. Behind her were 2 senior members of the executive team, both moving with the barely contained urgency of people who understand precisely the weight of what they are walking into. Sandra crossed the lobby floor without pausing. She did not look at Craig. She did not look at Vanessa. She did not look at the guards or the guests or any other point in the room. She walked directly to Damon, stopped in front of him, and said with a formality that carried the full weight of genuine accountability, "Mr. Carter, I am so sorry. This should not have happened." The lobby went silent. Not dramatically, not the way rooms do in films, the way rooms do in real life, one sound at a time, until the only thing left was the faint jazz from somewhere near the bar, which felt suddenly and completely wrong for the occasion. Sandra turned to face the front desk. Her voice was even, which somehow made it worse than if she had shouted. "This is Damon Carter. He is the founder and sole owner of Carter Hospitality Group. He owns this building. He owns the uniforms you are wearing, the contracts that determine whether you work here tomorrow, and every inch of the floor you are standing on. He has been in his own lobby for the last 40 minutes while this staff decided he did not belong here." She let that sit for exactly 1 breath. Craig had not moved. He was standing in the center of the lobby with the particular stillness of a man whose entire understanding of the situation has just been restructured and who has not yet worked out what to do inside the new version of it. Vanessa's hands were flat on the mahogany counter. Her face had gone the color of the marble behind her. Behind her, the 2 security guards had stepped back without being told to. instinctively creating distance from something that had just fundamentally changed shape. Eli looked up at Sandra, then at his father, then back at Sandra. "Dad," his voice was low, just for Damon, "you own this whole place?" Damon looked down at him, and for the first time since they had walked through those revolving doors, something in his face softened completely, without anything underneath it competing with it. "Yeah, son, we do." Nobody moved. That was the thing Damon noticed most in the seconds that followed, the complete absence of motion in a room that had, just minutes ago, been moving towards something loud and certain. He stood slowly, settled Eli beside him, and looked at the room the way he had been looking at it all night, with the careful, unhurried attention of a man taking inventory, not with triumph, not with the satisfaction of someone who has won something, but with the clarity of someone who now knows exactly what needs to happen next and is prepared to do it. He looked at Craig first. Craig opened his mouth. "Mr. Carter, I want to explain. We had absolutely no way of knowing." "You're right." Damon's voice was quiet, completely level. It carried across the lobby without effort because everything else had gone so still. "You didn't know who I was." That is exactly the point. He looked at Craig's face, at the certainty that had lived there all evening, the complete and undisturbed confidence of a man who had never once considered that he might be wrong. And he spoke the truth of what had happened the same way his father had always spoken the truth of things, without decoration, without heat, just clearly. "My father spent 30 years as a porter in hotels like this one. He came home every night carrying something that never fully left him, the weight of being looked at by people who had decided before he opened his mouth that he didn't matter." Damon paused, looked at the marble floor, the light, the design he had signed off on years ago in a room full of people who believed in what he was building. "I built this company because I believed it didn't have to work that way, that the person standing at your front desk deserves dignity before they have proven a single thing to you, not after you have assessed their clothes, not once you have decided they look like they belong. Before." He looked back at Craig. "You didn't just fail a guest tonight. You failed everyone who has ever walked through a door like this one and been made to feel like they didn't belong in it. And you did it in front of my son." Craig tried once more. The sentence didn't make it far. "Craig," Damon said it quietly, "you're terminated, effective immediately." He nodded to Sandra, who stepped aside to make the call. Craig's face settled into something gray and inward. Whatever argument he still had in him, he chose not to use it. He straightened his jacket once, the small automatic gesture of a man trying to preserve the last intact piece of his dignity, and then he walked toward the back office without another word. Damon crossed to the front desk. Vanessa looked like she had not taken a full breath in several minutes. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes carried the particular shine of someone working very hard to hold themselves together. Damon stopped at the counter and looked her directly. "You made a choice tonight based on how someone looked. I want you to sit with that. Not with what it cost you professionally, with what it means, what it actually feels like to be standing on the other side of it." His voice was even, not unkind. "I am not ending your career here, but you are going into a full retraining program, not skills-based, values-based. You are going to spend real time understanding what this work is and who it is for. If you come through the other side and you still want to be here, the door is open. But tonight cannot happen again, not to anyone." Vanessa nodded, small, real. Damon turned.
He walked to the concierge desk where Joel had been standing through all of it, motionless, his expression carrying the tension of someone waiting to find out if they are in trouble for something they did not do. Damon stopped in front of him and kept his voice low, just for Joel. "You saw it. You knew something was wrong, and I watched you tonight. The way you tracked what was happening, the way something in you recognized exactly where the line was, even when the structure here made it impossible for you to cross it." He paused. "Starting tomorrow, you are moving into a supervisory role in guest services, because I need people in positions where they can actually act on what they know is right." Joel looked at him for a moment. Something moved through his face, through several things before it settled. "I won't let you down." "I know," Damon said simply. He turned back to face the room. The guests who remained were watching him openly now. No pretense, no phones, just people waiting in the way people wait when they sense that what comes next matters. Damon spoke without preamble. "Every person who walks through our doors gets treated with dignity. Not after you have assessed them, not once you have decided they look like they belong. Before. Every person, every time, without exception. That is what this company is, and it is the only thing it has ever been willing to be." He looked around the room one last time, at the desk, at the bar, at the marble floor his father had spent decades maintaining for other people and never once been invited to cross as a guest. "If anyone here cannot commit to that standard, I would genuinely rather you find somewhere else to work, not as a threat, just as the truth of what we are." The room held those words. And then Eli, who had been standing beside his father through all of it, with Captain tucked under his arm and the deeply serious expression of a 9-year-old determined to understand the world correctly, looked up and tugged once on his hand. "Dad," completely matter-of-fact, not a trace of drama in it, "if you own the hotel, does that mean we can get the really good room?" It moved through the lobby like something released, not quite laughter, something adjacent to it, the sound a group of people makes when tension that has been building for 40 minutes finally finds somewhere to go. Even Sandra pressed her lips together. Even the security guard on the left exhaled through his nose in a way that was almost a smile. Damon looked down at his son, at the earnest face, the worn bare, the absolute, uncomplicated sincerity of a child who had just watched something heavy and was now, with complete efficiency, moving on to the next thing. And for the first time all night, Damon smiled, fully, without anything underneath it competing with it. "Yeah, son, we can get the really good room." 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a woman came through the revolving doors of the Grand alone. She was dressed plainly, single bag, the particular tiredness of someone who had been traveling since early morning and was running on the last of whatever had been keeping her upright. Joel was at the front of the house when she came in. He came around from behind the desk before she reached the counter, introduced himself by name, asked how he could make her stay easy. He did not look at her bag. He did not look at her clothes. He looked at her face. Within 2 minutes, her shoulders had come down half an inch. Within 5, she had exhaled, the way people exhale when they realize they are somewhere safe. In the far corner of the lobby, Damon stood with Eli beside him. Scheduled visit this time, jacket instead of a hoodie, though Eli had still brought Captain. They had been there for 10 minutes, and he had not announced himself to the floor yet, because he wanted to see this first. Just the ordinary work of the place, the everyday version of the thing he had spent his life trying to build. Eli watched Joel lead the woman toward the desk, watched her face change, watched her shoulders finish coming down. Then he looked up at his father. Is that what it's supposed to look like? Damon watched the woman settle, watched her exhale the rest of the way. Yeah, that's exactly what it's supposed to look like. Eli considered this with the quiet thoroughness he brought to most things. Then he nodded once, tucked Captain under his arm, and reached up to take his father's hand. Damon held it, and they stood there together in the corner of the lobby he had built, watching the place finally become what he had always meant it to be. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity before they prove anything, before they show you what they have, before you decide whether they belong. That is not just good business, that is just what is right. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and come back. We tell more stories like this one every week.